Welcome, pilots. My name is Hybrid V, and we are going to do a deep dive into the fire and water tech that was shown off at CitizenCon for Star Engine, and it's going to be coming to Star Citizen very soon. First up, we had Mike Snowdon, the director of visual effects, take the stage, and he showed off some dynamic fire and showed that fire can start from weapon impacts, misfires, damage to the environment, and whatnot. And if a fire does break out, it will break out realistically and propagate throughout the environment. As a result, players will need protective clothing since oxygen will be depleted from the environment, temperatures will rise, so that protection is going to be crucial for that. Players can also fight fires with fire extinguishers. They could also use the new engineering tech coming in soon to vent out oxygen so they can kill the fires that way, but we'll talk more about the resource management system later in a separate video. But for now, we're going to be talking about the fire tech. And he also said that fire can just keep going and just completely damage and destroy an environment until there's pretty much just nothing left. And if that happens, you're probably going to want to get repairs done because there's nothing there that's going to be left. The componentry and all that's going to be done and dead at that point. And after that brief introduction to the fire tech, we had Ali Brown, Senior Director of Graphics and Procedural Tech, come in and show off the behind-the-scenes process. And he talked about how the designers can go into a level and mark off different materials within that level and assign them different levels of flammability. So that way, if a fire does break out, certain materials are going to be more susceptible to fires than others. He also showed a really interesting debug video showing what it looks like behind the scenes as the simulation starts to spread this fire around. So let's go ahead and look at that demo video because it's really interesting.
So here's our debug mode that shows us what's going on in the simulation and is what we use to track it. And you can see these squares enlarging to show us where the fire is spreading. For each of these voxels, we're tracking the fire, the temperature, fuel remaining, the amount of smoke. And the fire is propagating via convection and radiation, which are both accurately simulated. And it's consuming the gases and producing the knock-on products as well as it goes. And because we're using a proper simulation, like Mike mentioned, when you vent a room, not only are you removing the oxygen and putting the fire out, but if the temperature remains the same, if oxygen is reintroduced, the fire will reignite and it will continue burning, just like it would in real life.
Ali then went on to explain that the next step of the fire simulation tech is to actually scale it to an online environment, which is a challenge of itself. So obviously they do this all for Squadron 42 and in behind closed doors for testing, but in reality, the next real big challenge for the team is to scale this to an online environment, which introduces so many other variables. So that's going to be an interesting challenge going forward. They then went on to show off a video of the simulation again, but with the various effects, the various visual effects and whatnot. So he showed off all that in a video. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now.
Okay, so how do we create realistic dynamic fire visuals in Star Engine? Well, we start with the simulation, as just described by Ali, and this gives us the data we need to drive the visuals. Then we bring in the burn shader. So this can be applied to static environments, and we have a lightweight version of the shader for entities, which is kind of based on the dirt shader and wear. Then we've got the glow, which is an animated surface decal shader for static environments. This is where we start to bring in some nice motion. And then we bring in the GPU particles, which are spawning from voxels and in screen space. Obviously, these are doing a lot of the work visually. Then we bring in the lights. These are spawned for clusters of voxels as opposed to per voxel as an optimization, a cluster being a representation of voxels close to each other. And then we bring in the fog. So this is height-laid volumetric fog. The smoke fills the room and it goes up to the ceiling before filling the rest, and we're simulating that. So to finish, we're going to take a look at all of that put together in the game.
One thing I found that's interesting is that the shader effect doesn't stay applied to objects in the scene. You'll see there as the player goes and picks up the Pico off of the table, the Pico was on fire. You could see the actual fire effect on the Pico, but when he picks it up, the Pico is perfectly fine. This is kind of typical when you use shaders. It will apply like a kind of like shader mask to anything on the ground that it's above already, in this case the fire effect. And then as soon as that object moves away, you will notice that the actual object is no longer affected. We actually have this existing currently in the game now. If you actually ever land at like a landing pad, you'll sometimes notice that sometimes the shaders for the decals sometimes will poke through your ship. You'll notice this mostly at outpost landing pads than you will at major stations for the most part. But yeah, so this is kind of an issue that you have when you're using shaders like that, and I'm wondering if they're going to be addressing that, because it is kind of weird, or maybe they'll just leave it in. We'll see. I don't know. They didn't talk about that. They didn't mention it. It was just something I noticed. Now, one thing that I also noticed in this video is the fire seems like it's a little bit tricky to fight off. Now, I'm assuming, of course, they're going to have full control over the difficulty of how this fire spreads. So my assumption is that this is just the demo, and of course the player is not going to be able to fight the fire off, so they just want the player to just show the effect of it working, the fire extinguisher working, and then the player running away. So, I mean, it's not really too much of an issue, but it does worry me that if fires are really that difficult to put out, like, is there going to be any purpose to having a fire extinguisher? My guess, though, is this, again, it's just a demo, so it's not really that big of a deal. It's going to be interesting seeing this come to an online environment, because we will, of course, be able to use this against other players as well. So, for example, let's say you board another player's ship and you want to do harm to that ship. Maybe you can cause, I don't know, some type of short circuit, or you can damage componentry while they're flying and maybe their crew's not paying attention, or maybe it's a solo player. Now you've set fire to their ship, and their ship is now going to be on fire. That player's attention is now no longer going to be focused on flying or whatever it is they're doing. Their attention is now going to be focused on trying to put out that fire, either through engineering consoles or actually running back there to put out the fire. This could be a really interesting tactic of not only distracting players aboard a ship, but also killing other players aboard a ship, because of course you could try to start a fire maybe in the cockpit or something like that and keep the ship from moving. There's a whole bunch of cool things you could probably do with this, and I cannot wait to see this be utilized in an online environment. My final question for the team is plasma fires, because they did not actually show off plasma fires. We just saw general fires here. If you're not already aware, plasma is just ionized gas. It is a damage type they want to bring into the verse. And of course, it is going to have the ability to eventually just chew through metals and whatnot. And it's also going to be incredibly stubborn compared to your standard fire. There's also going to be other types of damage types from different types of munitions, such as incendiary rounds and whatnot. So yeah, we didn't see any of that. It looks like it is just kind of just general fires here. I'm assuming that this tech is, of course, going to be expanded on further and as it is brought into the universe. Right now, what we're seeing is probably just the finalized elements that we are going to expect to be seeing in Squadron 42, and that is probably going to be our first iteration online as well. But down the road, they have talked about wanting to do plasma fires and incendiary rounds and much, much more. So expect this to get expanded out soon, but we didn't see that here. But hey, it is what it is. It's just the first iteration of it. We'll see how that goes. Next, we had Will Hain, Engine Programmer Level 3, the water dev himself with the appropriate matching attire, took to the stage to talk about water simulations within Star Engine. He mentioned that CAG really want water to look as good as possible, realistic, and always to be in motion, as well as they need it to scale massively to something as big as an ocean, down to something as small as, say, like a hot tub or a puddle. And the old ocean shaders that they used to used a system called deferred shaders, which look pretty good in their own right, in my opinion, but apparently they don't work very well with transparencies. They have a few other kind of technical issues with them as well, so they instead transitioned to a new shader model called forward shading, which allowed physical-based lighting and integration with atmospherics, as well as better foam rendering and so much more attached with that. And in some of the example imagery they showed us, they showed an iceberg that had some correct refractions and reflections, which looked really, really good. And of course, they also talked about how this new system improves the light simulation. So they showed a Gladius shining its light into the water, and you can correctly see the transparency. You can see kind of like the underwater fog effect kind of interacting with it. So it's all physically based now. It looks really good. And also they said that one of the bigger challenges with making water, especially at higher altitudes, because of course, it's a space game, so we can go into space, is the integration of atmospherics to make terrain and water look distinct from each other, which apparently in other games is actually quite a challenge to do, but apparently they took on that challenge and they were able to improve that distinctive characteristic between water and land by increasing things like wave and light scattering, increasing detail of foam maps, which allows better looking surface and subsurface foam. And of course, this is all well and good just showing images. They also provided us with a little bit of a video demo showing this. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now.
This is our lakes on Stanton 4. Next we have water volumes on Horizon. There you go. And this last demo, this is a Clio on the Stanton system. This is what it currently looks like in game, and I think you'll agree, pretty dramatic difference.
And that demo is quite impressive. I'm going to go ahead and keep replaying it kind of in the background as I give my take here. One thing you should pay attention to is the actual reflections of the water here, the actual reflections within the water. You'll notice in the first shot that the lake actually doesn't, it has a reflection, but it's very basic. It's kind of just the generic reflection, really not too much detail there. And then, of course, as we get the improved version, you'll notice that the reflections have improved. Same with the Orison kind of little fountain area. You'll see that there's nice detail there, but not much going on. And then when they update it, you see there's actually really nice reflections. And you can see in the last one there, we have the ocean from the moon of Clio, and you can see the really detailed wave cresting there. It looks really, really good. So not only did they just improve the overall look of the water, including the light simulations that integrate with it, they also wanted to improve the overall physics of the water. So what they did is they needed to make sure that the actual physics itself were accurate, they were scalable, and one of the things they did is they added a system called surface wave propagation, which apparently is a much more efficient system than the original one they had, and they kind of had to go through all these different types of systems they wanted to go through, and I guess they settled on that one. And apparently during the live stream, I guess whoever was in the production house there, I guess they kind of were asleep at the wheel because they didn't actually show the beginning part of the puddle demo. I did capture that while I was in the audience, though. Unfortunately, my Steadicam decided to just give up the ghost for some strange reason right at the beginning, but I did capture the parts that were missed. So I'll go ahead and show that here anyway with the snafu and everything. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. And then I will cut back to the part where the stream caught back up. Let's go ahead and take a look at that.
I've got a demonstration here. We're going to have the player walking through the puddle. As you can see, as he steps, you get a bigger ripple, but even as he's stepping, the toe is being dragged through the water and moving the water accurately. This is not a cop-out. We're doing this in 3D. You see as I'm jumping. And then this next demo, we're going to fire some bullets. This is a bit loud, this one.
I swear the beginning of that demo is never to be properly recorded for whatever reason. I have no idea what happened there. Anyway, back to the show. So, of course, they want not just puddles to be affected by players, they want entire oceans to be affected by player movement as well as many other things. So they had to push the tech they use for those puddles also to a larger scale, to something as an ocean. And this is where they use something called multi-region water simulation, which is a smartly optimized system that basically looks at what is affecting the water in the simulation and then accurately represents what should be taking effect there. And this simulation needs to be accurate even if the player is looking away and then they look back while the simulation is still playing, right? And it has to be accurate to a T. A lot of games, when you look away from something and you look back, something may not necessarily be the same accuracy in its simulation simply because when you're looking away, it turns it off. And then when you look back, it just kind of truncates the effect that originally was there, or maybe it doesn't even replay the effect properly, or sometimes it just restarts the effect. And what they have to do is they have to make sure that if the player's client is looking away and they look back, the water has to accurately represent what was going on even during the time when they were looking away. So that's quite a challenge, and it's nice to see that they're going to be looking into that, of course, and they potentially have solved for that. They also said that this allowed them to create new visual effects from these weather and wave effects that are caused by physics. And they even have an idea of like having the water line on your visor, though he said that's not currently in the game yet. But they did want to show, for example, what would happen if we had some type of physical like sphere or something like that. Just a general idea of what it's like to move mass through the water. So they have a video showing a sphere physically affecting the water in their debug mode, just to show exactly what these physics look like. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now.
And here's a really good video of some of it in action. I'll just let that play. This is the debug mode. Essentially, we're moving a sphere of basically infinite mass through the water. And as you see, if we pan out a bit, we make our sphere a bit bigger, we get a much different result from the sim. Spawning the foam properly. It looks really nice. Really happy with this one. So what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to turn on the debug mode so you can see where the regions are. You see we've got these gray boxes. They light up green when there is a hit inside the box. We've also got different sizes going on. If you look near the shore there's a big cluster of text. That is a whole bunch of other regions because there's some stuff floating there causing little ripples that we can't actually see. And as you see, these scale properly. We can add the results from multiple sizes of simulation together, and they influence and interact with one another accurately. You see those big waves crashing over the little sim there. It works pretty nicely. I've gone ahead of my subtitles, but I'll just let that video play out. So, what does that look like when we bring it all together? What's it going to look like in-game? Now, you did see a little bit of this in the Star Engine trailer, but actually, I think this video does a little bit more justice to it, so I'm just going to let that play out for you. Forward in a second, you're going to see the wake start to happen behind us there. And from the cockpit perspective, water droplets on the glass thrown up from the water sim. This is what I'm talking about using multi-output. And that's us. Thank you so much, CitizenCon. Handing back over to Ali.
So yeah, some pretty impressive stuff we're seeing there. Definitely is going to be interesting getting into our hands. I'm very curious as to what this does for performance. Any type of simulation that you do in any game, whether it's a physics-based simulation or whatnot, is always going to be very heavy on both CPUs and GPUs, depending on where the primary calculations are going. From what they showed in this demo, it looks great, looks awesome, but again, like they said, they need to make sure that it actually scales up, because what happens if we crash 5, 6, 7, 8 A90 jumps into an ocean? Like, what happens? On top of that, there's some stuff we didn't actually get to see demoed in this, since this, again, is just the kind of, I guess you could say, first iteration or kind of close to finalized version that they want to go for what's going to be in Squadron 42 and eventually come into our hands as well. And there's a couple things here that are missing here. First off, of course, they didn't show anything about swimming, which is not really in the programmer's wheelhouse here. That's a whole different aspect of it. But I'm curious if they're going to do buoyancy on objects, of course, then that means buoyancy on players as well. So I would have loved to have seen them demonstrate some swimming, maybe get some character actors in there or done it as a separate panel, but apparently that was never to be showcased at all whatsoever. So it's unfortunate we didn't see that. The other thing is, will players be affected by wave crashing? Obviously, they've shown boats in the Squadron 42 demo, and it seemed like it was slightly being affected by the waves caused by the Cutlass as it was moving around. It seemed like it, at least. But does that mean if I'm swimming in the water or if I'm in a boat or something like that, am I going to be affected by these waves hitting me, or is it just going to be kind of a canned effect? I don't know. I would have loved to see more details on that. Also, waterfalls, lava flows. I mean, we know they've been talking about in some of the dev reports, they've been working on lava, and we haven't really heard much else about, say, like waterfalls and whatnot. What about alien waters on weird alien biomes? Like, these are stuff that we haven't seen yet, and it's pretty obvious that what they're showing here is still kind of just really the first iteration, really. The other thing that was not talked about is still what happens when a ship touches the water, right? I mean, we've heard about this in the past in other dev reports where CIG have talked about, well, we're not certain what we want the ship to do once it hits the water. So does it, well, like currently right now in game, if you touch the water with your ship and you go below like the cockpit or just at least the center of the ship just goes boom. That's it. And they've talked about, well, maybe you'll be able to crash into it and then float, or maybe we'll still keep it where it explodes, or maybe you'll be able to actually still get in it and then continue to fly inside it, so to speak, I guess swim through with your thrusters acting as propellers, getting you through the water. And yeah, they haven't really confirmed any of that yet. I'm assuming this is going to be in Squadron 42 because they're going to have water in Squadron 42. Am I going to be able to take my ship and turn it into a submarine, or am I just going to go back to a loading screen after I die because I exploded when I touched the water? This isn't anything they've touched on yet, and I don't know if if what they're doing now is fully locked down, or if they're going to continue to kind of iterate on this going forward. I would love to hear about that soon, so hopefully we will soon. The other thing they did not talk about was zero-G. They have shown in previous videos what looks to be like water in zero-G, and that was like long time ago. Of course, those can be just really bespoke, effects, not really anything too crazy, but is there going to be something more, deeper than that. Are we going to have physics simulation for water in zero-G? I mean, if I take out an 890 jumps gravity generator, is there going to be physically simulated spheres of water? Or is it just going to be some kind of canned animation? What's going to happen? What about fires in zero-G? We have not seen any of that yet, though we do know it is a conversation piece over there. So hopefully we'll get answers soon. All right, folks, that's it for me today, talking about fire and water coming to the Star Engine and a persistent universe near you. If you did indeed enjoy my breakdown of these panels, please leave a like as it really helps out the channel. And of course, if you want to see more videos like this and more coverage of CitizenCon 2953 down the line, subscribe. Until next time, fly safe, and I'll see you all in the black.